Good evening. Welcome to this special presentation by ThinkTech on fish farming, ocean technology, and the big question of why farm fish. And with us in the studio here this evening is Mr. Bill Spencer, the President and CEO of Hawaii Oceanic Technology, Inc. And welcome aboard, Bill. It's nice to have you here this evening.
Thank you, David. I'm delighted to be here.
Let's talk about this before we get into what your company does and the new developments, new technology. Let's talk about, Bill, for our audience here. What's the big picture about food security and ocean farming? What's happening that makes this such a vitally important topic that you need to know about, ladies and gentlemen?
Well, as you know, David, everybody loves seafood. In fact, we love it too much.
Yeah, put me in that category.
That's right. And we love it too much. It's healthy for you. It's heart healthy. It's low in fat. It's a great source of protein. But the fact of the matter is, our ability to produce seafood from the wild is extremely limited. In fact, our oceans have already reached maximum sustainable yield, meaning we can't catch enough fish to meet demand, and the more we catch, the more the resource is depleted and in fact distressed.
Is that just for the people who are watching this program? They go into the market. Is that why when you go into the supermarket and you look at the prices of ahi, for instance, it just seems to be always skyrocketing or something?
Yeah, it's a supply and demand issue, and as the resource becomes more scarce, the price continues to go up. But there's a food security issue here as well, and people are surprised to know that the United States imports 85% of the seafood we consume.
85%?
85%. It's our second largest natural resource import behind oil. And surprisingly, that results in a huge trade deficit. Our fishing industry just simply cannot catch enough seafood to meet demand. And as the world population grows, that demand is increasing at a very rapid rate. China already consumes more seafood per person per year than we do in the United States, 25 pounds per year compared to 15 pounds in the United States. Europe consumes about 40 pounds per person, Japan 60 pounds per person. So, the world is taking seafood out of the ocean faster than the ocean can keep up.
You know, Bill, if we just kind of imagine, I mean, what would happen if the China's consumption of seafood in pounds per person reached the level that Japan has at 60 pounds per person?
Well, it's staggering. I mean, right now we take 92 million metric tons of seafood out of the ocean every year.
Okay.
Now, the good news is that farming seafood supplies half of all seafood consumed in the world today. Of that 85% that we import,
right,
half of it is farmed product.
Interesting. I bet you didn't know that, right? Half of everything that's imported is a farmed product. Boy.
So, for example, shrimp, tilapia, catfish, mollusks like oysters and clams, and of course, in some countries, eel is a delicacy that's farmed.
Yeah, okay.
It's a $100 billion industry dominated by China.
Let's take one other little aspect of food security so that our viewers here can have the total picture, and that is if we take take our focus away from the local Hawaiian island situation here, and we look at many of the international news incidents that are taking place in terms of security or maritime security flashpoints. They are in the South China Sea. And so a piece of that South China Sea, as you know, has to do with oil and gas rights. But another very important piece has to do with food security.
That's right.
And the statistic, folks, that we all know, that, or at least Bill and I know, will share with you, is that in that area of the South China Sea where we've got China, Indonesia, Vietnam, Brunei, Malaysia, in that area, Taiwan, Philippines, there are 500 million people that depend upon seafood as their principal source of protein. And I mean, and that demand creates potential military friction.
That's right. And the Chinese fishing fleet is huge and very aggressive. They fish all over the world. And fishing, as it stands right now, is a very tough competitive industry because there are fewer fish in the ocean. Fishing fleets have to go further afield to find fish, and quotas and regulatory processes that try and restrict the take simply don't work. 20% of all seafood that's caught is caught illegally, meaning over quota, or in somebody else's exclusive economic zone.
Okay.
And that's particularly the case in Africa. 40% of Africans, the Africa EEZ, is being fished out illegally.
Now, let me see if I can summarize our discussion here, see if I understand this correctly. What you're saying is that the conventional forms of fishing that we all know about, there's no way that type of production, if you will, thinking of fishing as a production, can come anywhere near the current demand, much less the future demand. We're not able to produce enough.
It's simply not sustainable. I mean, the fact is the ocean is the last place that civilization hunts for food. It's sort of silly to think because, as Jacques Cousteau said, farming is what distinguishes civilization from primitive human beings. Yet we're still behaving like hunter-gatherers when it comes to seafood. And as you noted, in the South China Sea, you're coming to fight over it.
That's right. So, okay, so ladies and gentlemen, if you've just joined us, you're watching a special Think Tech production on why farm fish, and what we've done so far, I think, is kind of try to outline so you can picture the problem now. And so let's shift over. Let's talk about the solution, because Bill, you and your company, I know, are part of the solution. And so let's leave that to the bottom. And so let's talk about fish farming and this broadcast here from the Hawaiian Islands. We know from our history that the ancient Hawaiians, I mean, they had, pretty amazing engineering and technology with their fish ponds to produce, and I guess in the current jargon, what is that called, that type of farming?
Well, we call it ranching because really what the ancient Hawaiians were able to do is they built these ponds that had an inlet. Fish came into the ponds and then they were gated in, and they were essentially fattened and grown out to be of good consumable size, and they fed 1 million people. And it was a very interesting approach to fish farming. Now, catch and fatten was introduced by the Japanese in the 80s for bluefin, because they could see the handwriting on the wall and recognize that since bluefin is the top predator and the most desired species in Japanese sushi bar, they realized that at current rates that the bluefin was a diminishing resource. So they started this concept of going out and catching schools of immature bluefin, putting them in cages in the ocean, and fattening up the fish until they were market size and market ready.
Okay, so the relationship between the ancient Hawaiian technology or engineering of building a wall, and the fish are captured inside of this gated area, and the ocean flushes through that whole compound.
That's right.
And then the Japanese technology in the 1980s, is it all that different from the ancient Hawaiians?
Not really.
They're still onshore, right?
Yeah, the advantage, well, no, the catch and fatten is done out in the ocean with bluefin, whereas the ponds were, near shore. But the idea was to have a reliable resource. I mean, if you go out and fish today, there's no guarantee that you're going to catch anything. That's
Right.
why they call it fishing, right?
That's right.
But if
And
you're
luck,
able to,
there's
and
luck,
luck,
fisherman's
right.
luck, right, okay.
So, but if you corral some fish and fatten them until they're good enough or big enough to eat, then you have a reliable supply, and that's what it gets at, and that's why terrestrial-based fish farming has taken off. That's
Now,
why
that's the
shrimp
on-land,
farming. That's right.
farming.
On-land farming, and so, for example, places like Malaysia produces a tremendous amount of shrimp for the global market, and their shrimp farms are huge, 50,000 acres.
Are they doing this on land?
On land. But as land becomes more scarce, you can't devote a lot of land to farming seafood.
Okay.
So the trend that we're interested in and capitalizing on is to move fish farming from land, near shore settings out into the open ocean. Because, David, we've got a lot of underutilized ocean. People always think, we've learned since elementary school that 70% of the earth is covered by water.
Right, okay.
But
I remember that
Right,
number,
right.
okay.
And yet, that number is wrong.
Why is that?
Because the ocean has 3 dimensions. It's true that 70% of the earth is covered by water in the 2-dimensional space.
Okay.
But if
okay.
you take into consideration the 3 dimensions, the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, for example, is 65 million square miles at an average depth of 15,000 feet.
So when you start looking at depth, then what does the number get to?
20 to 1. It's
20?
Instead of a 2 to 1 ratio, it's a 20 to 1 ratio of ocean water to land.
Wow.
Now, that means that if out in the open ocean, which is virtually a desert, I mean, we've got oil and mineral activities going on, we have transportation, we have recreation, but for the most part, it's just like a desert.
So, I mean, but meaning there's plenty of room for other activities, to coexist.
Exactly.
Okay.
So moving fish farming out into the open ocean is a solution to producing seafood protein in the environment in which the seafood itself, the fish, are used to living. So you can produce it organically without the use of chemicals and antibiotics, as is often done in enclosed settings or ponds or harbors and bays where a lot of seafood is being produced today.
Before we go any further, Bill, I kind of want to relate something to our viewers so that they can see the difference. Last night, I happened to be thinking about this program, as you might expect, and so I went shopping for seafood. And I was at the cases at the big cases there at Sam's Club, and I noticed so let's just talk about salmon, for instance, okay? We'll get back to your company,
right.
what you're doing. And I noticed that there is a salmon they call ranched salmon, and I guess that means either near shore or onshore type of
What the salmon that's called Atlantic salmon is farmed,
okay.
and it is farmed in the ocean. I mean, they start out in hatcheries until the salmon smolt, which has become adapted to salt water. Then they're put in net pens in the ocean, typically near shore settings, bays and estuaries
Okay.
where the water's calm and where the
Easy to get to.
easy to get to.
Okay.
And then they're grown out for about 2 years until they reach market size. So Chile, Norway, Scotland, Canada are all big Atlantic salmon farming nations.
I bet you didn't know. I thought Atlantic salmon came from the Atlantic, but you know. Okay, so I'm looking at these two fillets of fish, fresh salmon now. So one of them is the Atlantic salmon or farm salmon, and the other is a wild salmon. And so I'm looking at these two, and I notice there's a huge color difference between the ranched
That's right.
salmon and the wild salmon. And the wild one has this real deep blood red color to it. Why is that?
Well, it's because the salmon in the natural environment are eating other fish that have what's called astaxanthin, which is essentially a an algae.
Okay.
And that algae imparts the red color
Okay.
into their flesh. Farm salmon, astaxanthin is put into their food so that they look pink. If astaxanthin wasn't in the food, the flesh would be white. And it's a natural substance. It occurs naturally in nature. It just so happens that the wild salmon take it up in the food that they eat. And let me mention to you, too, of course, we've all heard about the situation in the Pacific Northwest where we had a severe depletion of wild salmon because of rivers being dammed off and the natural breeding grounds for salmon were destroyed. So a lot of what people know to be wild salmon have actually been hatchery bred and released into the wild, where they go about their natural growth pattern and then, of course, are caught in the wild. But one of the reasons that fishery has been restored is the use of farming techniques.
You're watching a fascinating discussion. I mean, Bill, this is great. The name of this show is Why Farm Fish? And this is a special Think Tech production with Hawaii's Bill Spencer, who is the CEO and president, in case you just joined us, of Hawaii Oceanic Technology, Inc. So let's return now, Bill, to the technology that your company has developed, and that is something that's a bit unusual, where you're starting to use depth and distance and really taking this whole fish farming concept way offshore.
That's right.
Maybe we've got a picture here we can show our viewers to kind of start with that. What are we looking at here as an example?
Well, let me set the stage first. What you're seeing on the screen is our patented technology that we call the Oceansphere.
Okay.
And the Oceansphere is a buckyball, if you will, a design of Buckminster Fuller's that is unique in the fact that the bigger you build it, the stronger it gets.
That's the geometric design.
That's right.
Okay.
And this design is 82,000 cubic meters. It's 55 meters in diameter, which is a little more than a half of a football field in diameter. And in our case, we plan to farm tunas and the yellowfin and big eye tuna, and the Oceansphere could hold 20,000 100-pound tuna. So that's a 1,000 tons of tuna.
Is that a big catch?
That's a big haul.
That's a big haul. Okay. Now this structure that we're looking at, what is the surface made of? What are we seeing there?
Well, this is really a very high-tech approach to fish farming because in order to make fish farming economical and economically sustainable, you need to do it on a very large scale, no pun intended. And so since you can take advantage of the 3 dimensions that we were talking about earlier, we've built this to be very large. So the exoskeleton is made out of a fiberglass, a very strong fiberglass, and the netting that keeps the fish in and the sharks and other predators out is made out of a fiber called Dyneema.
Interesting.
And Dyneema fiber is stronger than Kevlar. It's actually used in bulletproof vests, helmets, armored vehicles, and of course fish nets and fish cages.
So that's the surface of what we were seeing here.
That's right.
Okay.
It's a netting so that the effluent can be dissipated by the surrounding ocean environment. And that's another important point about farming in the deep ocean, because in the deep ocean, further from shore, you don't have industrial pollutants. In fact, again, it's a desert-like environment. You've got phytoplanktons and zooplanktons. And so the effluent from the fish actually is food and nutrients for the lowest level of the food chain, the phytoplanktons and zooplanktons, which take the ammonia and nitrates from the effluent as fertilizer, if you will.
Interesting.
So it becomes a very nice environmentally sound approach to the problem. And since there's very little of those nutrients out there in the first place, by introducing the nutrients, it actually helps helps the environment, provides more fish for the low-level fish on the food chain. But let me just step back a second and illustrate why I think this is so important to take this approach we're doing.
Okay, okay.
And the fact is, I already mentioned that the oceans reached maximum sustainable yield at about 90 million tons of seafood a year. We're already producing about 60 million tons of food by farming on land and near shore. But the UN Food Agriculture Organization, which is an esteemed organization that looks at the global big picture about food supply, they've determined that by the time world population reaches 9 billion people, that we're going to need at least another 60 million tons of seafood a year.
Wait a minute. Let me see if I get these numbers straight. 90 million is the total production?
The total that's taken out of the ocean on
90
an annual basis.
90 million. And of that 90, 60.
On top of that,
Oh,
90
on
is
top
another
of that.
60,
On top of that, okay.
60 million. So if you look at the total, almost half of all seafood consumed, 150 million tons, 62 million of that is farmed.
Good Lord. So the United Nations number for sustainability in terms of being able to feed people in the years to come, that combined number needs to...
Approach 200 million tons, or we need to farm another 60 million tons.
We need to double the current farming rate.
Right. Because the ocean isn't going to produce it. In fact, certain species in the ocean are in severe decline, like bluefin tuna, big-eye tuna, yellowfin tuna.
Wow.
The Patagonian toothfish known as Chilean sea bass, cod, Atlantic cod, severely distressed, swordfish. There's just a number of popular species that are going to be extinct if we don't start farming more.
Wow.
And so with our technology, we're in a position to farm the kind of seafood that people love to eat, like tunas, like big pelagic species, like groupers, like cod, and diversify the types of farmed product that's out there in the world.
Well, let's see if we've got another picture that we can show our audience here. Oh, we've got
Well, this is
kind
a
of
close-up, yeah,
Okay,
that gives
so-
you a sense of scale. That's a diver there peering into the cage. These cages are designed to be submerged 60 feet below the surface, so they're not affected by surface wind and waves and water.
So some ship could just go buzz right over top of that. No.
Right, but as the fish farming in the ocean evolves, there will be either zones that are going to be
Okay.
designated for farming activity, and of course our Coast Guard has already anticipated that this will become an industry that will require either special zones or special
Okay.
markings on nautical charts, so that the fish farming areas can be avoided. We will also have attached to this as a topside buoy, which is actually a feeder buoy, and that feeder buoy, the one we're using, holds 100 tons of fish meal.
100 tons?
You've got to feed these fish, and it automatically dispenses it, and essentially results in a very significant labor reduction, because what we're trying to do is automate as much of this as possible. Even the spheres themselves are designed to stay in geostationary position, using GPS and telecommunications, the latest technology that's already being used in the oil industry, for example.
Well, just so that the viewer can appreciate this, Bill, how far offshore, it's 60 feet under the surface, but how far offshore is this cage going to be located?
Well, every country has.
Did I use the right word? Is it cage?
Well, the ocean sphere. We like to call it
Oceanosphere.
ocean sphere,
Okay.
but it's a cage.
All right.
The ocean sphere is designed to operate out in deep water. So every country has a 200-mile exclusive economic zone. So if we're going to do farming in our EEZ, you could be
Right.
out 50 miles, 100 miles, 150 miles, whatever makes practical sense.
We've got, once you get offshore here in the Hawaiian Islands, we've got some serious depth out
Yeah,
here.
our exclusive economic zone (EEZ) is 200,000 square miles. It's the second largest in the United States, next to Alaska.
Well,
But
Okay,
Our site, what we've been doing the last 5 years is going through the regulatory process that allows us to actually lease an ocean column in Hawaiian waters. So
lease
that's right,
an ocean
column.
column.
That's right. We have a square kilometer that goes from the surface of the ocean all the way down to the bottom at 1,320 feet.
And this square kilometer at 1,320 feet in depth, where is this located?
We're 2.6 miles off of the North Kohala coast,
Okay.
about 7 miles north-northwest from Kauai High Harbor.
So
And
out quite a ways.
well, we're out a ways. We're still within state territorial waters because, interestingly, Hawaii is the only state in the United States, aside from Maine,
Okay.
that has a ocean lease law that allows you to lease an ocean column to do aquaculture or mariculture, as it's
Bill, is this a first in terms of new technology for fish farming? This whole concept that your company's
absolutely
doing.
well. That's why why we met the standard of the U.S. Patent Office.
We'll get
but
to that, but just the big picture for our listeners is this is something very, very new, right?
we will be the first to have an untethered, self-positioned fish cage.
It's untethered.
Untethered. It's
Well,
not
wow.
tethered to the ocean floor.
What makes it stay there? It doesn't just flow with the current.
Well, you don't see this in the illustration, but we have thrusters at 90 degrees, 4 thrusters around the perimeter of the ocean sphere that are much like bow thrusters on cruise ships that allow a cruise ship to turn around without the aid of a tugboat. And these thrusters are controlled by a sophisticated command and control system, much like the military uses to control unmanned aerial vehicles or unmanned underwater vehicles.
Interesting. Boy, you got to admit, ladies and gentlemen, this is something that's really fascinating, and I'm not sure, but let me ask our producer, do we have another photograph that we should be showing our viewers here? And if so, let's take a look at that. Oh, okay.
Now this is what we call a flotilla, which is another part of our concept because, as I mentioned earlier, to do this with economic viability, you need to be able to scale the farming operation up.
Okay.
And our lease site off of North Kohala on the Big Island is permitted for 12 ocean spheres
This is the first in the world.
of this type of
Okay.
thing. I mean, there are nearshore tethered systems that could have many nets associated with them, net pens, but the biggest ones are about 20,000 or 40,000 cubic meters. So ours is twice as big as the biggest tethered net pen. And the reason we don't want to tether it is because it's first very expensive to tether
Sure.
something in deep water, and secondly, when you're tethered, the currents put a much more stress on the structure. When you're not tethered, you can wiggle around a little bit and
Ebb and flow, that
ebb
kind
and
of-
flow.
okay.
And the other thing is that some jurisdictions like you to fallow your site every year. So after you have a harvest, you have to stop farming fish for a year. Well, that to a farmer, who doesn't have a lot of land to move its field
Okay.
over, that can be a challenge. In our scenario, you can actually just move our equipment to another location and start farming in a different location.
So to complete the picture here, ladies and gentlemen, what you're looking at is these ocean spheres or cages that are used, made out of kind of a Kevlar-like netting
That's right.
with a fiberglass structure, and these are 2+ miles offshore in 1,300 feet of water.
That's right.
60 feet below the surface. And the interesting thing that you should know is this brand spanking new technology, which I'd like to call the iPhone 5 of fish farming,
Okay.
this is or something really new and very unique in the world here. And so what is fascinating to me is the technology with the GPS system and thrusters to maintain the location of these ocean spheres, Bill, And when you think about it, I mean, the technology is very similar to what you would see in the I hate to use the word old, but it's true. NASA manned spacecraft to
Oh, yeah.
maneuver in space. You use the thrusters.
The
to
same,
angle-
actually, the most relevant example in today's world is a modern day oil drilling platform. Because as you know, we're searching for oil in the ocean all over the world, and some of those oil sites are 10,000 feet below the surface. And to drill those, you can't build a drilling rig that's stuck in 10,000
Right,
feet.
right.
So what you have is you have a boat, if you will, a platform that has a drill on it, and that platform is kept on position with thrusters and GPS.
Fascinating.
It's the same technology. We're just repurposing it
Fascinating.
to fish farm. And the flotilla concept, which is important, is because to produce 62 million tons of seafood out in the ocean, just think about that. Each one of those globes is 1,000 tons. So we're talking about a lot of capacity that needs to be built up in the next 20 years to do this. So imagine a flotilla of
Okay.
ocean spheres 100 miles out in the ocean that maybe has 1,000 ocean spheres.
Okay, okay, I'm with you.
That would be enough to produce, what, 1,000,000 tons, right?
Right.
And that would have a tender ship with a feed mill on it.
Okay.
It's producing feed. It would have crew quarters, and it would basically be modern day farming in the open ocean.
Just like a major agricultural operation that we
Right.
might see in Central California or in the Midwest.
Exactly,
someplace.
but here's the most interesting part of this. Our lease site is a square kilometer, which is 247 acres.
Okay.
And once we're up to full production with 6 of these ocean spheres harvesting a year,
Okay.
that means 6,000 tons of ahi tuna being produced a year. To take the same amount of beef and produce 6,000 tons of beef protein, you need 21,000 acres of land,
Versus,
247 acres.
wow.
And, of course, you need fresh water for the cattle.
Absolutely.
The fish don't need fresh water. The other thing that's important for your viewers to understand is producing seafood protein is very efficient. It takes 7 pounds of grain or grass to produce a pound of beef.
Okay, 7
Seven.
to 1.
4 to 1 for pigs and lamb,
Okay,
3 to 1 for chickens.
okay.
Fish farming is achieving 1 to 1 food conversion ratios. So in terms of the production of
Boy, it's
protein,
really efficient.
it's incredibly efficient.
Wow.
Now people worry about, well, you're using smaller fish like sardines to create more valuable fish like tuna.
Okay,
Well, the fact is that sardines are algae eaters. They grow quickly. They procreate, like rabbits. And because our oceans are being so severely depleted of top-level predators, there actually are many more sardines out there than people realize. It's an extremely sustainable resource. Already 65% of low troposphere fish, like sardines, are used for terrestrial feed and for cat feed and for production of omega-3 fish oil that people take as nutraceuticals. So it's a very resilient resource that's quite sustainable. And of course, other sources of feed, even vegetable protein or algal protein, can be used as an alternative.
This is just almost mind-blowing technology, and the value to mankind so significant. How long has your company been at this?
Well, we started in July 2006, and we have gone through an incredible permitting process, which I'm honored to have survived. because we've been held to a very, very high standard in order to get the right to do our business.
Well,
But
let's get into that in a moment. But before we get into the whole permitting process, I know this has been a long, arduous journey. And ladies and gentlemen, I think there's some good news at the end of this, at the end of this program. But you're, we'll come back to the permitting next. But I think what I'm most interested in next is as you develop this technology and started to roll forward. Has there been some opposition to what you've been doing here in Hawaii?
well, there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about fish farming.
Why is that?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is this is a very new field, and a lot of people haven't been educated about the importance of it, as well as the technology and the advances that have been made. Another concern that people have is they don't understand oceanography. They don't understand how the ocean works. And so, for example, they think that, that fish poop is bad for the ocean.
When in fact it's a good thing.
Well, it's a good thing, and they don't understand the ocean's capacity to mineralize the natural effluent
Okay.
that comes from the farming process. Of course, other people don't like to see fish farms in their viewplane. They want to have a beautiful view, and
Well,
hence
I don't understand how can you even see this? It's
well, you
60
can't.
feet below
It's
the surface.
submerged, and it's almost 3 miles offshore, and it's at best a speck in the ocean. But if that's my point, and the whole reason for taking this further out, 50 miles out, is then it's not in anybody's viewplane. But there are forces in our society that adopt stances against things in order to raise money to keep their
Okay.
organizations
Okay.
alive, and so they'll promulgate
Generate a cause.
a cause, and they'll promulgate all sorts of misinformation to rally the troops and fill their coffers with donations. So in our case, an organization in Washington, D.C. Has funded numerous activist groups around the state to attack our endeavor.
Okay.
They're the same organization that attacks companies that bottle water or that are in the coffee business,
Okay,
for
okay.
example, because they don't like greedy corporations using a public resource to make a profit.
Okay.
Or at least that's their
perception.
their perception,
Okay.
and that's how they're able to raise money to keep their organizations going.
This talking about opposition now to your development of new technology, and I guess that's kind of goes with the territory, if you will. What about? I'm very curious to know if have you had opposition from the traditional fishing community, as somehow this is going to take bread away from their table? I mean,
Well, yes and no. I mean, I should tell your viewers that 90% of the people out there really love what we're doing because they're tired of paying high prices for seafood. They like to see more ready supply. They know it's healthy. They enjoy it. So they're definitely supportive of what we're doing. We've been very careful with the local seafood industry to not, and we promise not to flood the market with product. But the fact is, you talk to any fisherman, and it's not a bountiful ocean in the waters around Hawaii.
not anymore, at least.
And as it stands, we only consume in Hawaii 3,000 tons of sashimi grade yellowfin and big eye tuna a year. 1,000 tons of that is just over the New Year's holidays, when the tuna prices tend to really get up.
That's right.
up
They
there.
go through the roof.
75% of all the seafood we land in Hawaii is actually sent to the mainland or exported to Japan. And we continue to import 85% of the seafood we eat right here in Hawaii. So, so I think the ability to get a consistent supply, a very fresh product that hasn't been in the hold of a boat for 3 weeks, that's basically harvested right in our own pure Hawaiian
Sure.
waters, is a desirable thing.
Wow. Well, let's go back now to the topic that we started on just a little bit. Let's talk
Okay.
about the kind of the incredible gauntlet of regulatory challenges that you and your company have been put through. And I know you made the comment earlier that you were very pleased to be held to such a high standard and to have met such a high standard. But probably if I pushed you hard enough, you would not say that you would be pleased to run that gauntlet,
Well, I think there's sort of a disconnect with the regulatory process and the business world. We hear politicians all the time talk about how innovation and entrepreneurship is the key to improving our economy, and that's what
Okay.
America is all about.
Right?
But at the same time, our legislators have bent over backwards to impose regulations to calm the concerns of
Constituents. yeah,
constituents,
right?
and the loudest ones and the ones that make the most noise on Capitol Hill and in the state houses are the environmental activists. So the bar is set very high for folks trying to do things that involve the environment to satisfy these concerns. It's called the precautionary principle,
Okay.
especially when you're doing something new that hasn't been done before. Then the microscope is on, and they want you to answer questions that, frankly, you can't answer until you actually do it. And so that's what we've earned the right to do. We've had to do an environmental impact statement.
Okay. And where did that come out? Just so our viewers know.
Well, that was the first thing we did was an EIS and a cultural assessment, which was required to get what's called a conservation district use permit. The state manages our nearshore waters because they're essentially ceded lands out to
Okay.
3 miles.
Okay.
And in order to get our lease, we had to get a conservation district use permit.
All right.
So then, once the lease was granted, then we had to interface with the federal government to get what's called a federal consistency review. And that is my favorite permit. That's the permit that made sure that we got all the permits we're supposed to get.
The permit to make sure you get all the
That's
permits.
right. That's why that's my favorite permit. And then we had to get an EPA, Federal Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit, which is one that made us demonstrate that the quantity and content of the effluent
From
from the
ocean sphere.
ocean spheres, from the farming process, would in fact be mineralized within the ocean column that we're operating, so that we're not in effect polluting the water. They're allowing us to have the effluent so long as we can demonstrate that it won't pollute
And
the
so you had to
surrounding.
go through this process to prove by scientific tests and
Yes, and then
lab
then
results?
they've imposed upon us a long list of monitoring and testing requirements. For example, the EPA permit is going to require us to test the water around our cages on a monthly basis. They want us to test the bottom of the ocean at 1,300 feet on a quarterly basis, to see if, is there anything that actually is going to touch the bottom, which science and logic dictate will never happen. But nonetheless, we have to,
To prove it.
accommodate their monitoring
Okay.
requests, which are going to be very expensive, and it's going to increase the cost of our operations and increase the cost of the food we produce. And then finally, our final permit, which is the Army Corps of Engineers Section 10 permit, which is essentially required because we are an obstruction in the ocean, and the Army Corps has to satisfy the National Marine Fisheries Service, Protected Species Division, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, the State Health Planning Department, that our obstruction isn't going to be a problem.
Okay, now where you describe this kind of mind-numbing morass of environmental laws and procedures and permits that just like for our viewers, it's just like an incredible bamboo thicket you got to get through.
That's right.
All that. And where are you now in this whole process? How far away are we from the actually seeing the ocean spheres out there?
Well, after 5.5 years, we're within a month of having our Army Corps permit issue, and then we're ready to actually execute our business plan.
Okay, so when the Army Corps of Engineers gives that final approval,
That's right.
then what happens?
Then we're going to build our first ocean sphere.
Is that built here in Hawaii?
For the most part, the certain components are manufactured elsewhere, but the actual exoskeleton will be built here. It'll be assembled here, and then it'll be taken out to our ocean site, where we'll start testing it and making sure all the systems operate properly. And at that point, which will be about 18 months from start, we'll introduce the tuna that we've been working on breeding in captivity into the ocean sphere, and then they will grow out to harvest weight in about 18 months.
So I'm curious, do you have your breeder fish already?
That's right. We've been allowed the opportunity to collect essentially a small number of baby ahi, which
Okay.
we have in a very sophisticated holding tank.
And where are they now?
They're over in the Natural Energy Lab on the Big Island.
Okay.
And those fish have been growing out to essentially spawning age, which is about 40 pounds. And right now it's tuna season in Hawaii. It's yellowfin tuna season, and we're expecting them to start spawning any day now.
Okay, and so these breeder fish that will be introduced into the ocean cages are at about the 40, 50 pound.
Well, what they do, when the tuna spawn, they spawn about 3 million eggs. And then about 5% of those will become fertilized.
Okay.
In the wild, it's less than 0.5%, but we think in captivity we'll have a higher fertilization rate. Then those fertilized eggs will be fed the same kind of feeds that they get in the natural environment, and grown up for about 30 days, and then weaned onto a fish meal.
Okay.
And then those fish, once they're the right size, then they'll be taken out to the ocean spheres at our lease site and allowed to grow out from there. So the fish that come from our hatchery, we like to say egg to plate, but the hatchery bred fish are going to be trained to expect 2 square meals a day, unlike
Okay.
wild tuna, which are used to scavenging around and hunting for their food, which surprisingly they require 10 pounds of bait fish for every pound of growth. And the fish that they eat have eaten fish all the way down the food chain.
Okay.
So in the wild, a tuna has actually has about a 100-to-1 food conversion ratio.
It's not even as efficient as growing cattle.
Not at all. And that's sort of the irony of why are we still fishing instead of farming?
Right.
It just doesn't make sense when you
Incredible.
really when you think about it. And that's why you need to farm fish.
Okay, and that happens to be the title of our program. You're watching the special Think Tech production here called Why Farm Fish. We have Mr. Bill Spencer, who is the President and CEO of Hawaii Oceanic Technology, Inc., and I'm your host, David Day. And I guess, Bill, we're looking at, what did you say, 5 months or so to the final piece in the regulatory thicket?
Well, we actually expect sooner than that. We should have our permit, and then we get on with the business of deploying an ocean sphere.
So from where we sit today until I can go to Oshiro or
Right.
Tamashiro's market and get one of the Hawaii Ocean Technology ahi,
We're calling them king ahi.
the
King ahi.
king ahis, we're looking at about, from today, 3.5 years, something like that.
Roughly 3 years, yeah, 3.5 years.
And so to add on to this piece, if I back up in the timetable, this development of this technology, and then your dancing or fighting through the regulatory thicket, depending on the term that you want.
Right.
That puts us at an 8-year timeline in order to go from near conception
Right,
or
from concept to proof of concept. Once we have our first harvest, then we'll have gone full cycle. But after that, we'll be, of course, putting more ocean spheres in the water, and then selling the technology or licensing the technology around the world. The United States actually doesn't have, for our own territorial waters, a regulatory infrastructure yet that would allow a entrepreneur to start farming fish in our EEZ. And that's going to take probably 3 to 5 years before there are good regulations in
in other words,
place.
to break out of the state of Hawaii, to go to, for instance, offshore Washington
California
or
or
California.
Florida or
Okay.
anywhere in our exclusive economic zone.
So if I understand what you're saying correctly, is the only legally the only location in the United States where this technology could be started is here in the Hawaiian Islands.
Essentially,
Is that
or
correct?
Maine. There's salmon farming done in Maine. It's much more routine there, but it's not as big an industry as, say, Chile or Norway or Scotland. But Hawaii has an incredible opportunity, if you ask me, to actually embrace this opportunity to farm seafood in the
Sure.
open ocean. Because, as I said, we have a 200,000 square mile exclusive economic zone. We have non-industrialized waters, so there's no pollution
Right.
that could affect fish health or require the fish to have to take antibiotics. We have an incredible opportunity to be, the breadbasket of seafood, if you
Sure.
will.
No. I understand. I understand what you're
And
saying.
generate tremendous amount of revenues, which means tax revenues to the state. And that's why Hawaii has this regulation, because 10 or 15 years ago, state legislators realized that we had a strategic competitive advantage if we allowed aquaculture in our waters. And so that was really the reason they came up with the idea to allow aquaculture in our territorial waters.
Bill, as we've had this discussion here this evening, and we go back to the kind of the beginning of our program here. We were talking about the whole issue of food security and the national or the national friction that this food security problem or the drive to have enough food to eat, to have enough protein, is already causing in the world. It's interesting when you think about the real big picture that what you're talking about is one of the key building blocks for regional stability in terms of security and eliminating these types of flashpoints like we see in
Absolutely.
the South China Sea. So that I guess the point that I kind of want to, I don't know if you've ever thought of this, but this technology that you and your company have developed, I mean, this is actually a component for peace in throughout the world.
It absolutely is, and in fact, I've thought about that a lot because, what are the scarce resources that we've already fighting about is oil, right? We already fight over oil.
Absolutely.
Food, land, and water are right behind.
That's right.
And it takes land to produce food. We're already fighting over fishing rights in the South China Sea, not our countries, but the countries you pointed out. And so it's only natural that we come up with a way to civilize seafood production by farming it. And that's really, as an entrepreneur, that's the vision that I've had all along for this company, is that we can solve a huge problem, which is how to produce enough food to feed the world and calm those nations that are already fighting over the scarce resource
That's true.
found
Because,
in the
that's
wild.
absolutely true, because you have created the solution here, and
Certainly a solution.
and you know, let me. We're almost out of time here. I'm very curious. Are there potential countries or investors that have seen you starting to come through this regulatory thicket and about ready to get this whole process underway, that have approached you, that expressed some kind of interest?
Absolutely. We have a variety of strategic investors. We have people in the food business and the protein business all over the world that are anxious to have us prove our concept.
Well, I'm not
And,
going to let you go and give away any secrets yet. So the answer to my question is yes.
Yeah.
And we're just about out of time here. I just want to thank you, Bill.
My pleasure.
For Think Tech, thank you for joining us on this wonderful program, very educational. Thank you so much.
Happy to be here. Thank you.